Hey there, Wendy here with Jazzydoodledesigns, and tonight I'm going to be working in Tales from the Forest Kingdom by Karlzon. So let's get started. So I am going to be using a combination of NeoColor 2s, which I'll do on the background, and then I'm going to use Inktense and colored pencils on the Beetle. And I'm not 100% certain, but I'm thinking gold for the filigree and the legs, and then a bluish purple for the body, and then probably like maybe a teal blue and gold for the stars coming out. And then for the background, with the NeoColor 2s, I am going to be using light gray, beige, and a little bit of raw sienna to start with. So let's see how that goes. Okay, starting with the NeoColor 2s, I estimated that I used about 90% of the background is going to be in light gray, about 7% in beige, and 3% in raw sienna. Now, there's no exact formula for this. I am simply laying down color randomly, leaving little open spots for the other colors. If you want your background darker, then use a darker gray, or you could add more beige and raw sienna if you want it more warm. It's really what you like. Now, with NeoColor 2s, you want to make sure that you lay enough color on your background that you're kind of protecting your page from when you add water. So you don't want to skimp out too much on the color, and because then when you go to lay your water on it, sometimes you can have a little bit of, you're going to have more warping and that kind of thing. So I just like to make sure I have a real light or medium light coverage over the entire page when I'm done. The more color you add, the darker obviously the color will be. Also, feel free to color. You can color over colors, so you don't have to just put these colors down in the empty spots. Now, I did leave a little space for the star flow to make sure that I didn't put any color there. I ended up going back in and filling it in, so feel free to go ahead and extend that all the way up to the Beetle's body if you want. Now here I've went in and I started adding my water, and with this you want your brush to be wet enough to move the product, but not so wet that it's actually dripping or leaving puddles on your paper. Whenever you go over a darker color, like whenever I go over the raw sienna, you'll notice I wipe my brush, because if I don't, I am going to drag that raw sienna and really it will very quickly dominate the page. So it's all in what you like, but just understand that some colors will really take over a page quickly. So I do wipe my brush fairly frequently because I want to make sure I'm not getting too much water on the page in general. But basically I'm going to go over every single part of the NeoColor with the water, activating it and kind of blending those colors together. And then at the end, just assess your picture and add more color where you see fit. If you think that you have too much gray, you can go in and add a little more of the beige or the raw sienna. The other thing is you can go back in and blend where you've left stark lines, because you will see that there are certain stark lines. In a background like this, once again, it's all in the whatever outcome that you want. Sometimes those stark lines can look really good. Other times you might want a more blended effect. Just experiment and see what you think. Here I wanted the background to be a little bit smoother. I wanted just a little softer look. So I went in with my Prismacolors and I listed the ones that I used, and I just went back and forth with them, kind of glazing over the top, maybe adding in a little bit of that the peach beige to make a little bit warmer tones where I felt like I had too much gray. And yeah, I just did this throughout the entire background until I was happy with it. Next, I'm going to go in with my Inktense pencils, and I'm going to use Nightshade and Lagoon, and I'm simply going to lay in some color. And I'm going to just mix up spots of the Nightshade, which is a purpler tone, and then I'm going to go in with the deeper blue and fill in those gaps. So it really doesn't matter which one you put where. Or even if you do this, maybe you want all one color blue or one color purple, or maybe you're doing a green. But I've basically just added the two colors for a little variety and interest. Now with Inktense, once again, like NeoColors, you want enough product that you're going to be able to, when you activate it, fill in everything. You don't always have to cover every single bit of it. You can, if you wanted a gradient, you could leave a little bit of white space, but I wanted this really saturated. I wanted it a deep, rich color. So I went ahead and I covered everything using what I would call a medium light pressure. Not super light, but I'm definitely not laying in a thick amount of color. Now I'm going to activate it, and I'm going to use an alcohol colorless blender. So this could be a Copic, it could be an Ohuhu, or it could be a generic. I will list one in the description box that I use. I like these because you get 10 per pack. I thought it was 6, but I looked and it's actually 10 for one price, and it's something nominal. They're like under $10, so maybe less than $1 a marker, at least as of the time of this recording. And so what I did is I had one for when I used the darker shades, and then I had another one that I used for the lighter shades. Now I did try and wipe them off in between, but I found that I didn't have to worry quite so much about adding a blue purple to the gold that I was doing, because you'll see I did do that at least once in this video. But basically I'm just covering over the entire thing with the alcohol blender. Okay, so here I'm going in with the darkest shade, which is Nightshade. And I'm just adding a little bit to both ends. Then I'm going to go in with the next shade, which is Lagoon, and I go over the top of the Nightshade and all the way down. Then I'm going to go in with Bright Blue, and I'm not going over the top of everything, I'm just adding a little bit in. And then finally my lightest color, which is Lapis Blue. Now, that one little line on the side, I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, so I didn't completely color it in. I later do color it in, so if you want to do so now, that's fine. And then I just go in and I repeated my steps. Now for the next ones, I go ahead and lay in my lightest color first so that I can maintain the sheen of the beetle across the way. If I would have done it like I did the first line, I could end up with a wonky sheen across the beetle. So I just go in and I'm still using the lightest color. Next is the bright blue. So I add that in, just kind of blending a little bit, going over the top of that Lapis Blue, just a touch on both the top and the bottom. Inktense actually blend very well, so I don't find that you have to be quite as precise. But next is the Lagoon. This may be Nightshade actually. That's what it looks like to me. But it should be Lagoon, and then followed up by the darkest, which is Nightshade. Now, in my opinion, Nightshade and Lagoon are very similar in terms of which one's darker. I am using them together to create a darker blue. So I'm just kind of going back over the top of everything, kind of filling in any gaps I missed, although that's not super necessary since when you blend it out it will do that. But I really want this beetle to be rich and saturated, not washed out at all, so I'm laying in a little more color than is probably necessary. And then as you can see, that blue, the Lagoon blending into that bright blue. Now I'm going in with the alcohol markers, and you always want to start with your lightest color and then work your way to the darker colors. Whenever you get a big change in color, you want to wipe off your marker, because if you were to go in down into those darker tones and then straight into that middle section, you would leave a little bit of a mark. So I'm going into the light, and it's not as important when I work from the light to the dark to wipe off, but once you touch that dark, you want to be extremely careful about wiping off before you go back into your lighter shades. Now we're going to repeat the process over on this side, starting with our lightest color. I'm going to try and match up to the other side the same amount of light color that gives us that sheen in the beetle, and we're going to lay that color in first and then go in with our other colors and then activate it with the alcohol marker. So I'll leave you to it. Okay, hold on to your hats, guys. We're gonna start the gold. Okay, so this is a big learning curve right here for me. So I encourage you to feel free. I would like you to watch this part, but just don't start coloring until you see how I colored the right hand side of this filigree, because by going in with my darks first, it ends up making the overall piece of it look brown. And we definitely don't want that. We want it to look shiny and yellow and gold. And so I kind of messed up, and I wish I would have done a test and then I could have saw before I did the entire left hand side. But it is what it is, but it's a nice learning tool for you to be able to see what happens if you do it this way. Now, throughout all of the gold, I'm going to use these same 4 colors. The gold is going to be the yellow color that you see me add. The sienna gold won't come until later on when I use it. It is a little bit of a yellowish or an orangish yellow, and it'll add a richness to the gold. There's Seattle brown, which is the lighter brown, and then this brown that I'm using right now is the dark umber. And I use these same colors, so it's not the colors, it's just how I applied them. So I do encourage you to take a peek ahead before you start coloring, because we want to start with the yellow and lay down our yellow first. Okay, for now, how you should do it, or at least how I did it where I liked it better, is I went ahead and I went in with my lightest tone, the gold, and I laid that in throughout the entire piece. Now, if you'll notice, I did not cover all areas. I left little pieces, especially along the edges, white. And that white is going to help make this gold look shiny. And so don't just color in the entire thing in yellow. But this step right here really makes the gold look better. Now, I'm not saying you can't start with the dark. I'm just saying that when I did it, I ended up with too much dark. So I think if you knew what you were doing, you probably could start with dark and then add your light. But I felt like this actually worked pretty well for me. The other thing that I want to encourage you to look at is see where the black line is in the center. That's kind of like the peak. I look at these as them being a little raised at that peak, and so I pick one side of it to be darker, and that's where I add my darker tone. And I'm trying to be consistent throughout. So if you'll notice, I try to pick the inside of the curl to be where my darkest tone is. And I go in with my medium tone. This is the saddle brown that I'm using right now. And I kind of mark in where I want those darker tones. Then I come back with my darkest and just add a little touch of it along the line and where I want the darkest value to be. This is what seemed to work the best and give me the best results. Then as I come in with my water, I am very, you want to start at your lightest and work your way into your darker tones. Making sure to brush your tip off or wipe your tip off after every time of going into that dark, because if you don't, you will just drag your dark tones throughout the other pieces. And you'll start to get a feel for it. Okay, so I'm going in with the lightest color, which is that lapis blue, and I'm adding it to the center just because I want it to be lighter in the center and then kind of darker around the edges. I also noticed that these weren't filled in, so I filled those in. I also touched up a little bit of gold there. So now I'm going in with my darkest shade, that nightshade, and I'm just adding that in areas where I want it to be darkest. Now I'm going in with the lagoon. Actually, this is still nightshade, sorry. We're going to go in with the nightshade up here at the top and add our darkest in, just along the edges. Now I'm going in with the lagoon. And then finally the bright blue. Now you could go ahead and do the little eyeballs. I didn't do them at this point, I do them at a later point, but you could do them right now while you got the colors out. Sometimes I get so focused that I don't see the other things. If I were to color this in again, I would probably use a little bit more lagoon in the beetle's head rather than as much bright blue as I did, but it adds a nice variety of colors, so I'm okay with it. here I go in with Nightshade, and I just add some dark to the lines here to give some definition between each of the Beetle's body segments. And then I go in and activate them. So here I go into the center of this gemstone and I add Malibu and then bright blue, and then Lagoon to the edge. And just activate them. Quite honestly, I almost wish I would have picked maybe something like an orange or a red for this gemstone. I think that would look really pretty. Or even like a, better yet, maybe even a purple, but a different purple, like a, almost like a lavender. But I didn't. I kind of liked having it all blue, but I did want it to distinguish it color-wise from everything else that I've done. Here I'm starting with the stars. I'm using an antique white Inktense pencil, and I just wanted to add some white to these stars before I add any color. Now here I add that Malibu again, and I'm just adding it to little random segments of it, not the entire star. I don't want to fill the whole star with color, and that white kind of helps me from doing that because my pencil kind of butts up against it. But I want to distinguish them as stars, so I want there to be some dark edges to the star. And then I go in and activate. And I'm activating that white as well. And you can see the two of those colors start to blend. So now I'm going back in with that antique white, just adding a little bit more of that, just to soften these up a little bit. Next I come in with Lapis blue. It's funny how this was our lightest blue earlier. Look how dark it looks next to the Malibu. All about perspective, right? But anyway, I'm just adding a little bit of darkness to those edges. Just adding a little definition. There's no right or wrong way to do this. Here I'm going in with a violet. I just want to add a little bit of a lighter purple to the bubbles. So I'm adding violet and a little bit of white and mixing them on my board. And once I have that real light shade, then I'm going to go in and just add them to 1/2 of each of the bubbles, just for a little variation in color. Now I don't have to activate these because they're already activated when I mixed. I decide I want to add a little bit of Malibu to the bubbles as well. So just going in pretty much on top of that violet, I just add a little tiny bit, and I'm going to activate it with water because I want to blend it into the entire bubble, and water tends to blend a little more, I wouldn't say better, but more than the alcohol. Next I decide that I want this piece to be gold. So I go in just like I did before when we were doing the gold. I add all the light, leaving little pops of white. And then I'm going to go back in with my brown tones. Okay, well I guess I activate first. It's hard doing voiceovers, but I have a different side of my brain to edit, I guess, than I do to color. It's very hard for me to color and chat with you guys about what I'm doing as I'm doing it. That, and I say a lot, and so I like to edit all those things out. Okay, so now I'm going to go in and I'm going to put in just little swipes of dark. So this is the saddle brown here. Now this is the burnt umber. And generally with gold, you have bands of color. They're not, what makes it work is when everything's not blended. So if you notice that when these activate, they're kind of stripy a little bit, which seems kind of counterintuitive, but as I add these little bands of color to this, you'll see it kind of transform. So I want to put the dark and then the light brown in little pops next to each other. And then I don't want to smooth it all out when I blend it. I want it to be a little, you can see the difference between the two, how the one definitely takes on more metallic look. Now believe me, I have a lot of learning left to do when it comes to doing this kind of stuff, and I'm sure there's better teachers out there for gold, but I'm pleased with how it turned out. And to someone, like when I showed it to my husband, he was pretty impressed. So it doesn't take much to please him, I guess. But I think too often we're very critical of our own work, whereas when other people see it, it reads gold. So remember earlier when I told you that I was going to put in that sienna gold? That's what I'm doing right now. So this is sienna gold. And can you see how it just gives the gold a little bit of richness and a little bit of warmth? Now this is a personal taste. The brighter the yellow that you use, the more shiny and new your gold will look. The more earthier the yellow, the more aged your gold is going to look, in my opinion. Also, the dark tone is very necessary. I know it's tempting to not put that in there because you think maybe you want a shinier gold, but the dark is really what makes the gold look reflective, as opposed to to make it look gold as opposed to just yellow. So kind of keep that in mind when you're doing this. And like I said, placement is everything, and I'm sure there are people that could place this better than I have, but those are the principles, and I do feel like it's effective. So I'm adding Malibu to these little dots, once again not filling up the dots. Okay, so here I have the antique white and the violet like we did before, and I'm mixing them up. And then I'm going to add a little bit to each one of those little round circles. Now I'm going to go in with just the violet, and on these other little dilemma bobs, I'm going to add violet to them. Here I sharpen my pencil and I go in with a Malibu. So here I'm going to go in with some Distress Oxide. And the reason I did that is I wanted there to be kind of a mist look to this. And I wanted it to be blue, but not that blue, so I thought I would go in with this Lost Shadow and add a little bit more, I don't know, smoky look to it. Then I decided that was a little too dingy looking, so I took a pigment ink, which I happen to have Hero Arts, but it could be any pigment white ink. And I found that if I just tapped my brush, I got the little pops of opaqueness along with the parts that weren't, that were, the Distressed Oxide. And I was kind of liking that. So I thought I'd just go in and just keep adding that until it was as bright as I wanted it to be. And then I went in and redefined all of my stars with white. So eliminating all the lines of the stars and the bubbles with a white Posca. So while I have the Posca pen out, I decide to do all my white highlights on my gold. So I go in and I'm just making little pops of color on the edges, on the tips of things, and along the edge of things, just to make it all the more quote-unquote shiny. Next, I go into each one of those little circle or half moons and add a little dot of white on the tips. I'm going to do that on both sides, finishing up the little leggies here. If I was smart, I would have worked on the left-hand side and then the right, since I'm right-handed. But I don't think about those things, so now I'm having to do the little pointy tip thing with the pencil. I'm sure you guys never do that. Adding a little dot in each one of those circle or those bubbles. So I had kind of lost all of the pops of blue in our stars, so I went back in with Lagoon and, just like I did before, added a little bit of color on the one edge of the stars, and then I'm going to activate it with that alcohol marker. You wouldn't have to activate it if you didn't want to. You could leave it just with that more defined blue. Next, I wanted a little more sparkle, so I'm using Stickles, and this is Waterfall. And I'm just putting a little bit of that in the stars, just for a little something something. Next, I go in with Crystal Ice and I add that to the bubbles. And it's just a little bit of a different color. Now I have a Sparkle Pop pen because I wanted to let those stars dry. And this just adds what I would call a flat metallic to my gold filigree there. And I'm just adding it, not the entire edge, but the majority of each piece has one little strip of it. Just because I don't really want it to be all that way. Though, if you didn't want to do all the gold shadowing and that kind of stuff with the Inktense, you could just go in with a gel pen like this and add it to there. And I think it would look really nice. So I'm adding a little bit of gold to the tips of all of these where I added the white. Now I'm adding the gold. I'm not covering the white up entirely, but more at the base of it. I'll try and zoom in here. But once again, Wendy, you're right-handed. You should probably start on the left-hand side. So here in a second, I'm going to have to flip my book upside down, and I'm really sorry, but, you know, us impatient people don't always plan ahead very well. The final step is I go in with sepia and I add it to my darkest areas. I just felt like I wanted more contrast than I had. So wherever I had initially put that burnt umber, I'm going to go in and I'm going to add in some sepia. So that's what I'm doing here. Okay guys, I think that's everything. So I appreciate you being here with me today. I hope you enjoyed this, And we'll see you on the next one.